What if the very act of walking to your own well became a death sentence? On the 13th of January, 1888, the northern plains of America faced a monster. They called it the schoolhouse blizzard. The wind didn't just blow anymore. It became a weapon. It hit like a battering ram, driving snow so thick and fast that anyone caught in it would be blind, deaf, and frozen within minutes. The air temperature itself dropped to minus 38 degrees Celsius. And the wind chill, a term people in Thornfield, Nebraska, didn't even have yet, but understood deep in their bones, made it feel even colder. Stepping outside meant inviting death. To walk from one building to another, a distance of maybe 15 meters, was a gamble. You might not find your way. The wind could spin you around. You could wander until you fell and never get up. That morning, Emmeline Porter, 17, opened the back door of her family's farmhouse. She stepped into the storm. She needed water from the well. It was 12 meters away. She knew the path by heart. She had walked it 10,000 times, but the blizzard erased everything. All paths, all memory, all sense of direction. 3 days later, her family found her body. It was 180 meters from the house. Facing away from safety, her arms still reached forward as if she believed home was just ahead. Emmeline was not alone. Across the northern plains, the schoolhouse blizzard killed over 200 people. Many died within sight of their own doorsteps. The storm was a monster that swallowed the familiar. It turned backyards into killing fields. It transformed the simple act of walking into a death sentence. But on the eastern edge of Thornfield, in a small cluster of homesteads, not a single life was lost. 31 people, men, women, and children survived the 3-day storm. They never once set foot in the open air. They moved between houses, barns, wells, and root cellars through a network of tunnels. These passages ran beneath the frozen earth. They were safe from the wind that howled uselessly above their heads. The man who had dug those tunnels was Garrett Holbrook, and until the storm proved him right, they had called him mad. What drove him to build such a bizarre system, and how did his strange vision save an entire community? He arrived in Nebraska in the spring of 1881, a widower at 43. His wife, Lenora, had died in the bitter Minnesota winter of 1879. A blizzard had caught her between their house and the barn. It was a short distance, only 18 meters. She had gone to milk the cows at dusk, a chore she had done thousands of times. But the storm rose fast, as prairie storms often do. It swallowed the familiar path. She lost her way. Garrett found her the next morning. She was frozen solid, her hand reaching out toward a home she could no longer see. He never forgave himself for those 18 meters. That short, deadly stretch haunted him every day. Nebraska was supposed to be a fresh start. He filed a claim on 65 hectares of prairie land east of the small settlement of Thornfield. He paid the fee, built a simple sod house, and began the hard, familiar life of a homesteader. His sorrel gelding, Dusty, pulled the plow, breaking the tough earth. Garrett's hands, still strong, built fences and outbuildings. He worked from dawn until dark, just like every other farmer, trying to outrun a grief that clung to him like a shadow. But even as he built the necessary structures, the house, the barn, the chicken coop, the root cellar, the well house, he was planning something else. Something nobody in Thornfield would understand, not until it saved their lives. He was planning tunnels. The first tunnel would connect his house to his barn. He started digging in June of 1881. He worked in the cool quiet of the morning and the twilight of evening. When the sun wasn't brutal and the dry soil wasn't baked hard, the prairie earth was not easy. It was thick with roots and studded with rocks. The shovel hit resistance, testing even Garrett's deep determination. But Garrett had patience. Grief had taught him patience. It had taught him well. He dug down 1.5 meters, then moved forward. He shored up the tunnel walls with timber cut from the cottonwood trees along the creek. The passage was 1.2 meters wide and 1.5 meters tall. It was cramped, but big enough for a man to walk hunched, or for animals to be led through in an emergency. He lined the floor with gravel for drainage. Simple wooden doors at each end helped control airflow and keep out vermin. The tunnel stretched 18 meters long. It took him 3 months to complete. When he finally emerged from the barn end on a September morning, squinting in the sunlight, His neighbor to the north happened to be riding past. This was Cyrus Pemberton, a prosperous farmer. Pemberton owned 130 hectares and employed 2 hired men. He saw himself as the natural leader of the community. He had an opinion about everything. Holbrook, Pemberton called, pulling back on his bay mare. "What in God's name are you building?" "A grave." "A tunnel," Garrett replied, his voice quiet. "Connects the house to the barn." Pemberton stared at him. Then he laughed. It was a loud, braying laugh that carried across the wide-open prairie. "A tunnel? You've dug a tunnel to your barn 18 meters underground, so you don't have to walk 18 meters above ground?" He shook his head slowly. "The sun has cooked your brain, man. That's the only explanation." Word of Garrett's tunnel spread fast through Thornfield. It became the subject of endless jokes at the general store, the church, and the schoolhouse. "Holbrook's digging to China," the men would say, laughing. The women whispered at sewing circles that he means to become a mole. Children ran around calling him the Mole Man, giggling behind their hands. Cyrus Pemberton, the wealthiest farmer in the settlement, loved being the community leader. He took Garrett's project as a personal mission. At a harvest celebration, where the town's important families were gathered, Pemberton declared, "The man is not right in the head." His voice carried across the room. First his wife freezes to death, and now he spends his days underground like some kind of burrowing creature. It's unhealthy, unnatural, and frankly, it's an embarrassment to the settlement. His wife, Prudence, nodded hard. "I feel sorry for him. Truly, I do. The grief has clearly unhinged him. But tunnels? Whatever will people think?" The laughter and whispers kept going, but Garrett didn't stop. He couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Lenora reaching for a door she couldn't find. Through 1882 and 1883, Garrett kept digging. He expanded his tunnel system. A second passage linked his house to the well house. This meant water could be fetched without stepping outside. A third tunnel ran from the barn to the chicken coop. A fourth led to the root cellar, where food could be grabbed in any weather. His homestead slowly became an underground web, a total of 120 meters of tunnel connecting every building on his land. The work was immense. The materials cost a lot. Timber for shoring, gravel for flooring, doors, hardware, and all the small things needed for construction. But Garrett had no wife, no children, no one to care for but himself. He spent his money on lumber, not luxuries. He spent his time digging, not socializing. Neighbors watched him with a mix of pity and scorn. The tunnels became a local legend, a story people told about what happens when grief takes over a man's mind. But Garrett wasn't finished with just his own land. In the spring of 1884, he went to his nearest neighbors, Ansel and Bet Lindgren. They were a young couple, struggling like most homesteaders, with a 2-year-old daughter named Sonia and another baby on the way. The land demanded everything and gave nothing back easily. "I want to dig a tunnel between our properties," Garrett told them, "a passage that would connect your root cellar to my barn in case of emergency." Ansel Lindgren was polite, but confused. "Emergency?" Garrett explained. "Blizzard, fire, anything that makes going outside dangerous. If you could reach my place underground, you'd have options. Shelter if yours fails, help if you need it. The tunnel would be there." The Lindgrens looked at each other. They had heard the stories about the Mole Man. But Garrett was offering to do all the work himself, at no cost to them, asking nothing in return. They agreed, more out of bewilderment than any real belief. The tunnel between their properties took 5 months to complete. It was 60 meters long, properly shored and drained, with doors at each end. When it was finished, the Lindgrens could walk from their root cellar to Garrett's barn without seeing daylight once. Word of this new tunnel made the mockery start up again. Holbrook's connecting the whole territory, Pemberton announced with disgust. First his own buildings, now his neighbors. The man means to turn Nebraska into a rabbit warren. But then something unexpected happened. The Lindgrens, despite their early doubts, found the tunnel useful. In June of 1885, a fierce thunderstorm hit. Lightning struck the prairie, and fires raced across the dry grass. Bet took the children through the tunnel to Garrett's stone barn, while Ansel fought the flames. The barn was safer than their sod house, and the tunnel let them get there without crossing the fire's path. Betty told the other women about it. Ansel mentioned it to the men at the general store. The mockery didn't stop completely, but it grew quieter. It was tempered by the grudging admission that the crazy tunnel had actually proven useful. Then, other neighbors started to approach Garrett. The Kowalski family, who lived east of him, asked if he could connect their well house to the Lindgrens' property. This would make another link in the growing chain. Old Henrik Dahl, living alone north of Pemberton's spread, wondered about a tunnel to his cabin from the Kowalski barn. He was getting too old to walk far in winter, and the isolation started to frighten him. Garrett agreed to every single request. Through 1,885 and 1,886, he just kept digging. The tunnel network spread, a branching web that eventually connected 6 homesteads. People could now move between properties without facing the elements. Each family contributed what they could. Some offered labor, others timber, or simply meals for the man who spent his days underground. The passages weren't fancy, but they were solid. They worked. Cyrus Pemberton watched this growing network with rising irritation. The tunnels had become a kind of community project, all organized around the very man Pemberton had called a lunatic. Even worse, the network connected all the smaller homesteaders in a way that left him out. His own property, the largest and richest in the settlement, remained an island, cut off from the web. He had been offered a connection, of course. Garrett had approached him in the autumn of 1886. He proposed a tunnel that would link Pemberton's barn to the Dahl property. This would complete a circuit, connecting every homestead in the eastern part of the settlement. "I will not," Pemberton had declared, puffing himself up to his full height. "I will not take part in this foolishness. My buildings are built right. My workers can walk 15 meters without getting lost. I don't need tunnels, Mr. Holbrook, and I will not have them dug beneath my land." Garrett took the refusal without argument. The network would stay incomplete, but it would serve those who wanted it. That would have to be enough. The community was divided by the tunnels, but the true test was still coming. The winter of 1887 to 1888 started out easy. December was cold, but nothing brutal. The snow came down in manageable amounts, the kind the wind would just spread evenly across the prairie. Homesteaders went about their work. They tended their stock, fixed their tools, and got ready for spring. At the general store, people talked about prices and politics, not about the weather. Then, January 12th arrived. It dawned warm, unseasonably warm, almost impossibly warm. The temperature climbed into the 4 degrees Celsius, and the snow that had built up began to melt and sag. Children wore light coats to school. Farmers went out to check their animals. The whole prairie seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, happy for a break from winter. But Garrett felt a change, and he didn't trust it. He had learned to read the prairie's moods. This warmth felt wrong to him, too sudden, too complete. It was like the smile of a man about to pull a knife. He spent the morning checking his tunnel doors. He made sure the passages were clear, that the lamps were full, that the whole system was ready for whatever might come. He knew the feeling. The prairie was holding its breath. The storm hit that mid-afternoon. It came without any warning. A wall of cold and snow rolling across the prairie like an avalanche made of air. The temperature dropped 28 degrees Celsius in less than an hour. The wind rose from a whisper to a scream, driving snow sideways. Visibility fell to 0. Day became darkness. The world outside just disappeared. The killing wind was back. The Lindgren family was the first to use the tunnels. Ansel had been in the barn when the storm hit, separated from his wife and children by 36 meters of open ground. In a normal blizzard, he might have risked the walk, guiding himself by rope or memory. But this was not a normal blizzard. This was annihilation. He stumbled through the barn, found the tunnel entrance, and emerged in Garrett's barn 15 minutes later, shaking with cold but alive. From Garrett's barn, another tunnel led to the Kowalski property. From the Kowalskis, a passage ran to the Dahls. From the Dahls, connections branched to the other homesteads in the network. The system Pemberton had called madness became a lifeline, allowing families to reunite, supplies to be shared, help to reach those who needed it. Old Henrik Dahl had fallen on the ice that morning, before the storm, and had injured his hip. He could not walk. He could barely move. In a normal blizzard, he would have lain in his cabin alone, hoping for rescue that might come too late. But the tunnels changed everything. The Kowalski boys reached him within an hour of the storm's arrival. They brought food and blankets. They brought the simple comfort of human presence. They stayed with him through the 3 days of howling darkness, keeping his fire fed. They kept him alive. Bette Lindgren, who was 7 months pregnant with her third child, felt the contractions begin on the second night. The baby was not due for weeks, but babies do not follow schedules, and this one was coming regardless of the storm above. Through the tunnels, word spread. Garrett, who had helped deliver calves and foals, and had some rough knowledge of midwifery, made his way through the passages to the Lindgren homestead. He arrived in time to help bring a healthy baby boy into the world, a boy who would have been born in a house with only a terrified young father in attendance if the tunnels had not existed. For 3 days, the network functioned as Garrett had designed it. 31 people moved between homesteads without once stepping into the storm that raged overhead. Food was shared, firewood was distributed, the sick were tended, the frightened were comforted, the isolated were connected. The system held. On Cyrus Pemberton's property, 400 meters from where the tunnels ended, the story was very different. Pemberton had 4 people to think about: himself, his wife Prudence, and his 2 hired men, Gustav and Piotr. When the storm hit, Pemberton was inside his big house. Gustav was out in the barn. Piotr was somewhere in between, walking back from the well house with a bucket of water. Piotr never made it. They found his body 2 days after the blizzard finally broke. He was 30 meters from the barn, the water bucket still clutched in his frozen hands. He was 23 years old. He had come from Poland, hoping for a new life. He died walking a short distance from the well to the barn. Gustav, trapped in the barn, had no food and not enough warm clothes. He survived by burrowing into the hay and sharing what little warmth he could with the horses. He lost 3 toes to frostbite. Pemberton and his wife Prudence huddled in their grand house. It was the largest house in the whole settlement, meant to show how successful they were on the prairie. But when the coal ran out, they started burning their own furniture to stay warm. They had plenty of food, but no way to get to their other buildings, no way to reach neighbors who might have helped. All they could do was wait and pray. When the storm finally lifted on the morning of January 15th, Cyrus Pemberton came out of his house a changed man. His hired man was dead. His other worker was crippled. His wife had a cough that would stay with her for months. His grand house, once a symbol of his prosperity, was half empty, furniture reduced to ashes in the fireplace. He looked east toward the cluster of homesteads that had survived intact. He knew what had saved them. He knew who had built it. The walk to Garrett Holbrook's cabin was the longest of his life. Garrett was outside, clearing snow from the tunnel vents, when Pemberton approached. The 2 men stood facing each other in the brilliant winter sunshine, their breath plumed white in the cold air. The silence between them was heavy with everything that had happened. "Piotr is dead," Pemberton said. His voice was flat, all the bluster gone. He was 23 years old. He came from Poland to make a new life. He died walking from the well to the barn. Garrett said nothing. He knew loss. He understood what it cost. "I called you mad," Pemberton went on. "I laughed at your tunnels. I refused to let you dig on my land. I was proud and I was stupid, and a man is dead because of it." Garrett still kept silent. "My wife wants to leave," Pemberton said. "She says she cannot bear another winter here. But his voice broke, "I have nowhere else to go. This is my land, my life, everything I built." He drew a ragged breath. "Will you teach me? Will you help me build tunnels on my property? I'll pay whatever you ask. I'll do whatever work you require. Just please, help me make sure this never happens again." Garrett looked at the man in front of him. This was the same Cyrus Pemberton who had mocked him for 7 years. The proud landowner, the self-appointed leader, the voice that called him mole man and burrowing creature. That man was gone. In his place stood someone smaller, humbler, someone broken by a lesson that should never have been taught. "I don't want your money," Garrett said finally. His voice was quiet. "And I won't dig tunnels only for your property." He paused. "The network needs to connect everyone, or it doesn't work. You were the missing piece." He looked toward the west. "Without a link through your land, we couldn't reach the homesteads out there." He made his offer. If you let me dig across your property, a main passage that connects the eastern network to the western settlers, I'll help you build whatever tunnels you need for yourself. No charge, just cooperation." Pemberton's eyes filled with tears. He didn't try to hide them. "Yes," he whispered. "Whatever you need, yes." 2 weeks after the blizzard, a gathering was held at the schoolhouse. The dead had been buried. The injured had begun to heal. The whole community came together. They mourned the 3 souls lost across the wider Thornfield area, including Emmeline Porter, the one-daughter 7-year-old, who died walking to her own well. But they also came to acknowledge what had been saved. Mayor Wilkins, the informal leader of Thornfield, addressed the assembly. His voice was grave. 31 people survived the storm in the eastern settlement, he said. 31 people who could move between homesteads, share resources, help each other without stepping into the killing wind. He turned to Garrett, who stood at the back of the room. Garrett was as uncomfortable with attention as he had ever been. "They survived," the mayor continued, "because one man, 7 years ago, started digging tunnels that the rest of us called madness." The mayor's voice thickened. "Mr. Holbrook, you lost your wife to a blizzard. You could have let that loss destroy you. Instead, you let it teach you. You built something that saved lives, including lives that belonged to people who laughed at you, who mocked you, who called you mad." He paused, looking out at the room. "We were wrong, all of us, and we are grateful." Cyrus Pemberton walked to the front of the room. His steps were still shaky from the 3 days he had spent, trapped, afraid, and cold. "I led the mockery," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I called him the Mole Man. I wouldn't let him dig on my land. I said his tunnels were an embarrassment." He stopped, taking a breath. "My hired man is dead because of my pride. My other worker will never walk right again. My wife might never forgive me for the fear I put her through." He turned to Garrett. "Mr. Holbrook, you offered to help me, and I refused. You offered to connect my property, and I called it foolishness. You tried to save my people, and I turned you away." His voice cracked. "I can't undo what I did. I can only promise to do better. And I can say, before everyone here, that I was a fool, and you were a prophet. I am sorry." The schoolhouse fell silent. Then, slowly, others began to stand. Families who had laughed at the tunnels, then survived because of them. Neighbors who had whispered about the Mole Man, then sent their children through his passages to safety. One by one, they offered their acknowledgement, their apologies, their thanks. When the confessions ended, Garrett walked to the front. He wasn't a man of many words. Speeches made him uncomfortable, but some things needed to be said. "My wife died 36 meters from our front door," he said quietly. 36 meters. I found her the next morning with her hand outstretched, reaching for a home she couldn't see. I have thought about those 36 meters every day for 9 years. He looked around the room. "The tunnels are not madness. They are memory. They are my promise to Lenora that no one else will die reaching for a door they can't find." He paused. "I will teach anyone who wants to learn. The digging is hard, but it's not complicated. The materials are not expensive. The work can be shared. Every homestead in this settlement can be connected if we do it together." He took a deep breath. "The storm will come again. It always does. The question is whether we will be ready." That summer, Thornfield began to dig. Under Garrett's watch, the tunnel network grew from 6 connected homesteads to 17. The main passage through Pemberton's land, the link that joined the eastern and western parts of the settlement, finished in August. It created a continuous underground route stretching almost 1.6 kilometers. Cyrus Pemberton worked alongside the crews, swinging a pick, hauling dirt, doing the labor he once thought was beneath him. His wife Prudence stayed. She found a purpose in the community effort that her isolated prosperity had never given her. They never spoke of Piotr without grief, but they honored his memory by making sure no one else would die the way he had. The phrase, "digging a Holbrook," entered the vocabulary of the Nebraska prairie. It meant building connections between people, creating passages that would hold when the surface failed. People spoke it with quiet respect, as if they understood something about foresight that only comes through loss. Garrett Holbrook lived to see the Great Blizzard of 1899. It hit the same territory with the same fury. By then, the Thornfield network had 32 connected homesteads with over 4.8 kilometers of underground passages. Not a single life was lost in the settlement. The children who had once called him the Mole Man were adults. Now, they called him something different. They called him the Man Who Remembered. He passed in the spring of 1903 at the age of 65. He was buried beside Lenora on the Minnesota homestead where she had died reaching for home. His body was returned there by his request. He had never stopped loving the woman who, through her death, taught him how to save others. The tunnel entrance nearest his Nebraska cabin bears a marker the settlement placed there in 1904. The inscription is simple. He built paths where there were none. The wind was not wind anymore. It was a weapon. But after the blizzard of 1888, Thornfield had built paths beneath that weapon. They transformed their vulnerability into resilience. True foresight is often dismissed as madness. Not until disaster strikes does its wisdom become clear. The deepest insights are forged in personal loss and a shared sense of purpose. If this kind of story is your thing, subscribe.